An old-time friend just sent me an article. I don't know where it came from, but anyway, it's a very interesting article. It involves one of the first cases that I ever got involved in. So I came out here freshly from Chicago out of law school, returning to my home turf, but I didn't want to go back to Loveland because I thought that was a little bit too small a turf for me. So instead I came to Boulder. I only planned to be here for a year. And then I was going to go back to graduate school at the University of Wisconsin and do jury behavior studies. The funding had dried up because of the Vietnam War, and I was told to wait for a year. The funding would come back, and then I could go back to school. That was 1967, and as many of you know, the war didn't let up, and I was sort of stuck here for a while. In the meantime, I was an activist in Chicago, very active in a lot of things. And one of my friends in Chicago referred a client to me named Gelia Tannenbaum. He didn't say much about Gelia Tannenbaum other than the fact she was very needy, and she had 2 children, I think aged 2 and 7 or something like that. She contacted me and asked her to find a place for her to live, which I did. And she moved out here, and I was the only person she knew in this area for a while. Through my contacts with Mrs. Tannenbaum, various things occurred that were mysterious to me. She appeared in a lot of different ways, in a lot of different manners, making all kinds of claims, from being a Russian intelligence agent to a CIA agent to various other agency agents. Coincidentally, a classmate of mine from law school's father delivered her in St. Louis, I think St. Louis, Illinois, or maybe it could have been Missouri. But later her files showed that she was an informer for a government agency back in the late 50s, early 60s. There was a file on her, an FBI file, which I got access to, a lot of it. There were other files on her by other agencies, which we'll get into later. I plan on doing a series about this. I'm working with a woman named Sally Denton, who wrote Bluegrass Conspiracy, a book about many of my clients, and Maggie Fine, who has a French Connection source that she's going to let me review one of these days when we get together. Many of these are too sensitive to send by mail or email or any electronic stuff, which is going to necessitate a meeting of some sort. Now, when Mrs. Tannenbaum came into my life, it became very interesting, and I was over my head. She was supposedly an activist against the war in Chicago. I learned later she wasn't. She was an agent provocateur. She also said she was an ex-wife of Henry Crown, which I later found out was pretty much bullshit. And there was other things going on that were very curious. One thing I'm very certain of, she had really deep and varied intelligence connections. She referred a client to me named Thomas Reha. Thomas Reha was an interesting character. His mother married one of the administrators of the Marshall Plan in Europe after World War II. His family owned Skoda Iron Works of Czechoslovakia. His father was the only elected representative of Czechoslovakia. He went to Berkeley and then graduate school and studied under Kissinger, and was Kissinger's first graduate student to go behind the Iron Curtain with the thawing of the Cold War in the 50s. He was also a first cousin to a national security advisor named Brzezinski. Sally Denton, who worked with me over the years, was also married to a national security advisor under the Nixon administration and published some stuff with him as co-author. Anyway, the case has haunted me for 50 years. When I was early in my career, I was told by, I believe, federal agents of some agency or another not to discuss what either Tannenbaum or Rhea told me in confidence as their attorney. Pretty soon, Tannenbaum was rumored to have been the charge of the disappearance of Thomas Rhea. Rhea was on the faculty at CU, having come here from University of Chicago. Tannenbaum came here from University of Chicago shortly after Rhea. Rhea disappeared and the shit hit the fan. There was lots of investigations. It came out that the University of Colorado president, Mr. Smiley, was a CIA asset. It turned out that the CIA had infiltrated the student organization at University of Colorado. It turned out that the University of Colorado was a hotbed of intelligence activities, including the CIA, NRO, NSA, Office of Naval Intelligence, Air Force Intelligence with the Blue Book Project, and various other things, as well as missile sites and defense industry bullshit stuff. And anyway, one of my hobbies, actually, what I studied as and what I really viewed myself as was a criminologist and an expert in large-scale organization. One of the things I did in my last year at University of Colorado doing graduate work there was a sociogram on a political structure involving a referendum on fluoridation. Since the population of Boulder was heavily Seventh-day Adventist, and they were really adamantly against this type of addition to water supplies, etc., I suspect that they were behind the opposition to the fluoridation. I was dead wrong. It wasn't them. They stayed neutral. It was a group that I pretty much identified as a right-wing group associated with a group called the John Birch Society, and they were well-funded, well-trained, and well-managed. One group did submarine drills off the Platte River to make sure Russian submarines didn't come up stream, and all this kind of bullshit as cover stories. They also recruited Cuban mercenaries from Boulder, and they sent Tibetans to Colorado to train to harass the Chinese from 1960 on. So we had Vietnamese pilots being trained in Boulder, we had Vietnamese rebels being trained in Boulder, we had Vietnamese forces, we had all kinds of spy and war activity going on here, plus a little group that I was associated with that was anti-war. In any event, I sociogrammed a group here that was connected to drug trade. Now, what I did, I was one of the first, in fact, I think I was the first person after the push on illegalization of marijuana to do a marijuana case that didn't require the hippies to cut their hair or shave or anything else. My first client was a musician. He came in, he asked if I wanted him to cut his hair, and I said, I'm not the one going to jail. So all of a sudden, I got lots of hippie clients, and I was their darling, and the other lawyers in town didn't want to spoil their reputation or maybe even fog their reputation any by having to represent a hippie or somebody from the unwashed community. To me, I didn't care. I was only going to be here a year anyway, and I wanted to have some fun and learn things and trip out, so to speak. So one of the things I used to tell my clients in the 60s is when they were acting up or acting stupid or whatever, I said, I advise you to take more drugs. You can't harm yourself any more than what you already have. And that kind of became the model of my legal advice, I guess you would say. So my sociogram identified 5 groups that were playing with marijuana back then. 4 of them got arrested, and 1 of them never seemed to get arrested. There were a lot of curious things happen when Rhea disappeared. I was warned by the government not to interfere. I had to refer Mrs. Tannenbaum to a colleague of mine who also had press connections that I knew, who practiced in Golden. He took over the case. RIA people got another lawyer. RIA was involved in a divorce with a woman who had Czech intelligence connections. Her uncle was head of the Czech intelligence, the equivalent, the STB, the equivalent of the KGB of Russia. And he married her for some reason and brought her to this country, and it caused a lot of attention. RIA also was the first person to go behind the Iron Curtain on behalf of Kissinger and study the Soviet bloc in the 50s. So we got spooks coming out of the closet everywhere. And dumbass me, I announced I was going to run for district attorney of Boulder County. And if I was elected district attorney, I'd call a grand jury and find out why this one group that I knew was pretty active in drug trafficking never seemed to come to the attention of the police or any of the other authorities. And secondly, I'd call a grand jury to find out what happened to my client, Thomas RIA. And also, why was my client, Gelia Tannenbaum, being persecuted? Now, I posted the article on my Facebook page if you guys are interested. There's got to be interrelation because I don't know how to do graphic shit on the video stuff. So what I'll do is on one of my pages I will paste or I will copy stuff like this. This is a picture of my client, and hopefully it will change it. Now what you'll find out, there's a connection with Kissinger, there's a connection with Brzezinski, there's a connection with the heroin trafficking, there's all kinds of spook connections and intelligence connections going to the CIA, the FBI, Office of Naval Intelligence, etc., 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 including National Reconnaissance Organization, as well as a lot of stuff going on in Boulder. The day after I lost my election to Alex Hunter by 221 votes, I got a call from the clerk and recorder of Boulder County saying that the feds were over there digging, asking for any filings on me or any records pertaining to me. That was the first inkling that I knew something was wrong. A while later, an agent identifying himself as an IRS agent named Lyle came to my office, showed me his badge, and told me I was being audited by the IRS. The audit lasted 87 consecutive weeks. At that time I had a 6-man law firm. So at the end of 87 weeks, I had no law firm, no equipment, and a huge tax lien over my head, and essentially was put out of business by the government. This is my saga. So Stykes, or I think Lyle Stykes was his name, came into my office and said I was under audit. Didn't say why or anything. The feds could come in the office and threatened that if I talked to anybody about Tannenbaum and RIA, I wouldn't have a license anymore. And all of this strange stuff happened. They tried to subpoena my case file, which I contended was privileged. So they proceeded to investigate and interviewed every client that they could find out that I had represented, asking them how much money they had paid me and what they thought of me and all this kind of stuff. Now, I was a criminal defense lawyer by then. I had a lot of good clients, faithful clients. And you could imagine what happens to a client or prospective client when somebody comes up to him and says, "Hi, I'm a federal agent. I'm investigating your lawyer." Well, I broke up my law firm at Blewett, Bisbee, and Guile. And I, at that time, was under investigation by several agencies, which was part of the harassment. I was accused of plotting to kidnap a client, a very wealthy client that was supporting my political campaigns. I was accused of plotting to kidnap her and holding her for ransom for $32 million, which was ridiculous. I had a power of attorney for the whole estate, which was much more than that. Secondly, I got accused of masterminding a jewel robbery at her father's estate in the Polo Grounds, just as the Bonanno Group and some other people accompanied or associated with the Bush people wanted to take over his banks. They went in and robbed the place and took out specific pieces of jewelry, claimed I had the inventory, and I was there the day before the house burned down, or the burglary, and maybe turned off the alarm system. That was total bullshit too. So I had all this pressure, grand jury, I was accused of arson, robbery, jewel robbery, kidnapping, and all this kind of stuff. So I moved my office to Denver. And that's where a lot of this story will start. I hope to add to this if the government doesn't stop it out between now and then. And hope you guys follow and enjoy it.